Hello and welcome to Beginners Python and Machine Learning. My name's Tim Cummings. Every Tuesday we do a session teaching you how to use Python with different topics. My name's Tim Cummings. Something to do with machine learning. Every Tuesday we do a session teaching you how to use Python. We'll be looking at learning. My name's Tim Cummings. Flask, machine learning. Every Tuesday we do a continuing on from one I did how to use Python. A few weeks ago, my name's Tim Cummings. Flask, machine learning. Every Tuesday we do a continuing on from one I did how to use Python. My name's Tim Cummings. Flask, machine learning. Every Tuesday we do a continuing on from one I did how to use Python. All right, now I'll be listening on YouTube chat and also on the Slack channel. So there's a Slack channel, Learning to Code. So if you've got any questions, just put your questions in here, and I'll see if I can answer them. And if someone else is online and they see a question that they feel they can answer, then feel free to have a go at that. All right, so let's get started. The previous video was at Meetup 152. I've got a link here. This link should be below the YouTube video and also here on the Meetup page that takes us to GitHub, where I've really just repeated the instructions from last time, but this time we're just starting from challenge 2. So if you click on that link, you'll see what we're up to. There's links to GitHub, and there's also this link here to the GitHub, the source code that we're going to be using. So if I click on that one, you'll see it takes us straight across to our source code, and we can get the code here. You can see there's the URL to get that code, which will really be just pretty similar to what we you just had on the other page. It'll have just .git written on the end. Okay, now I'm assuming that you've got Python installed. I'm assuming you've got Git installed, and I'm going to be using Pycharm. So if you've got Pycharm, then you can just follow along and everything will be exactly the same. Pycharm is free, the community edition, that's all you need. So I really strongly recommend it as an IDE for doing Python programming. A lot of people use Visual Studio Code. I find Visual Studio Code is fine, but it doesn't, it's a bit lighter weight than Pycharm, so Pycharm just gives you a little bit more. Now if you haven't been with us from last week, then you'll need to get the whole repository, so you can get it from the version control system here. So you click Get from VCS, so I'm in Pycharm at the moment. And this is where you put that URL that you've copied from the previous place from GitHub, and that's what it'll be if you need to type it in manually. We're going to use GitHub version control, and just find a place that you want to save it. For me, it was in the pull down menu. It won't be for you unless you've already done it before. You'll have to actually type it in. But I've already got it, so I'm just going to go straight to the project that's got it in it, which is bpaml for Beginners Python and Machine Learning, Prime Minister, which is, we're doing a database of Australian Prime Ministers. Okay. So we've just finished demo 2, which is creating a run configuration to initialize the database. And let's see if we did that. I didn't do that. I think all you need to do there to run it is you. So I'll just give you a bit of a brief rundown. We're using Git for version control, and you'll see there's a Git Git tab here, and we want task 2 to be the one that's the one that we've checked out. So if it's not there at the moment, then you have to find it in the list of tasks either here on local. You see some of the tasks aren't even here, so you could find it on the remote origin and just check it out. So for example, I wanted task 3. I'd just check out at this stage. I'll just check if I've made any changes. Nope, no changes. So this will work. So I can just check out task 3, and that brings it in from the remote server, and now all the code is what task 3 would be. But now go back to task 2, because that's where we should be. So we'll check out task 2. It's now at the top. It's got the yellow tag there which says this is the head of where we're currently making changes. And you can always look down here in the bottom right hand corner, you see which branch you're on, which is currently task 2. And you can see all the merging that I've been doing has created quite a complex, because I've been making some changes to task 1 and then I had to merge them up all the way through task 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But anyway, once we've got task 2 in place, then we can start making changes. So to hide this Git place, we can this Git pane, we can just click on the Git tab, and it did show it the first time we clicked on it, and the second time it hides it. All right. So we've done the demo. We're going to demonstrate the demo init.db. So from the command line, so I clicked on terminal here, and I'll type flask init.db, and it says initialize the database. So that's created a database if it didn't already exist. So now we can look up information. So for newcomers, you need to do that. And you can see the database is created up here. It's in a folder called instance in our project folder, and this is our application Prime Minister, which is a package. So instance is outside that. It's been ignored in our Git, so it doesn't go up to Git. So it'll just stay here on our local computer. Okay, so what we're doing, demo. List all the Prime Ministers in a table. Okay, so now we have to run our application to see it running. If you were running it last week, you'll see that you should have a run configuration up here already, so you can just click on that for run. If that doesn't work, you can just go down to the terminal and type flask run, and that'll create the application for you, running as a web application. It's all live, and this is the URL that it will be on. So if I click on that URL, it opens up our application in a web browser. I'll just put that over to the side for now. And as it stands at the moment, we've got our home page, we've got the people page, and we've got the Prime Minister's page. And the demo that we've just done has listed all the people who've been Prime Minister in Australia. Okay, so that's the demo. List all Prime Ministers in a table. So now challenge 2 is to try to do this for all the people in the database in list person. So let's have a quick look at the files that we've got in our project. And this is, we're using the standard file layout recommended by Flask. So we'll have our Python files like init.py, and it's called init, so it's __init_.py means that it's the main file in a package, and the package name is Prime Minister, and because it's got an init file, you'll have a little dot in there saying that we've got a package here. And so we've just been putting everything into this one Python file, which is here, and you can see we've got a function here, view Prime Ministers, that's run a bit of SQL. You don't have to know SQL to understand this, but if you do, it'll help a little bit. So we've just selected a few fields. So first of all, you say select which fields you want, then you say for which tables you want it from. So we're doing this table joined with that table. We can say how the join happens, which is they're based on the person ID, and we can even put in a criteria to filter out which ones we want. So we just want a particular ministry. And we can order the Prime Ministers by surname ascending, and then their common name. All right. If you want, I can go through more of the schema of the database, but just let me know if you want me to do that. Just quickly here, some of my field names that I've used. I put VC in the front of anything that's a varchar. Anything that's an ID, I just call an ID. Anything that's a date, I start with the word date. And that just makes it easier for me to remember while I'm using these fields what data type they are. Okay, now we want to do similar to what we've done for Prime Ministers, and we want to do it for the persons page. It's going to be quite so hard, because in this one we had to filter on which ones had been Prime Minister. In the persons page we just want all of them. So the SQL for that's going to be a bit easier. In fact, I've even given you the SQL that you're going to need to use. So there it is there. Yep, I'll just copy that. And we'll say in here SQL equals, and I'll do triple double quotes in Python, so I could have done triple single or triple double quotes, and that means I can put in a line, I can put in a string that even contains carriage returns and line feeds. So let's paste that in, and there's my string. String of text, which is going to be the SQL that I'm going to run. Now I'm just going to follow what we've done here in View Prime Ministers. So page title, we're just going to set that statically here when we call render template, so I don't need a variable for that, but I do need to store the database link. So let's call Prime Minister database equals db.get db, and I've created the SQL in a string, and now I'll get all the persons, and I'll get them by calling the SQLite command to execute the SQL that we've created. And the next thing is to provide any parameters. In this time, in the Prime Minister one, we had to say which ministry it was for, and that was bound into our SQL string where there was a question mark. In this case, we don't have any parameters. There's no question marks needing to be filled out. So we just take the SQL as it is straight and fetch all the records that are in there. And then we can send them off to the template when it gets rendered. So you have to give it a variable name here, which is the variable name in the template, and a variable name here, which is the variable name that's in our function. And once we've done that, then these two variable names, page title and persons, can be used in the template as variables in the Ginger templating language. So if we'll have a look at list minister, you can see we used all the ministers here in a loop, and Ginger can do these for loops, and it had a variable name that's going to be the loop variable, and that's what was used. So we might just use something very similar here for persons. So a list of person, and we'll paste it in. So it's just a table. First row has got the headers, common name and birthplace, and the list is going to be every person in a list variable called persons. Alright, so I've saved those, and now if I go back to my web browser and look at people, I've now got a full list of everyone who's in the database, and you can see it's a much longer list because it includes deputy prime ministers, it includes wives of prime ministers and deputy prime ministers, where we know that information. So there's our prime ministers, and there's all the people in the database. So you can see how useful this is as a way of writing web applications. It's a lot easier to understand than having to create all the HTML from scratch. Using this templating system makes it a lot easier. Let's have a look at the code, the HTML that it produces. So I've just pressed F12 here. I'll see if I can zoom in. Yep. So we've got the H1, people in database. We've got a div. In the div, here's a list of people in the database, H2. So there's the H1, there's the H2. And then there's a table with a T body, and then lots of TRs. So the first TR is the heading, and then we've got a TR for every member of the database. And so you can see how that relates to our one here. We've got our table, our TR, and here we've got a loop, and so this creates one TR for every person in the list. There's also, we're inheriting some of the things like the h1 tag gets inherited from layout.html. We'll look a bit more into that later. Okay. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we can save our changes into our own Git branch. So what you do, you normally make the branch before you start making changes, but we can do it afterwards if we forget to do it beforehand. So we'll just create a new branch from task 2, and we'll give it a name, task 2 attempt. So this is our attempt at task 2. And what we've just done there is exactly the same as this command, git checkout -b task 2 attempt. If you're running on Mac, you could probably just press that, or Linux, you can run this, press the play symbol here, and it'll just run this script. But this doesn't work in Windows, and I had a go at trying to get it work. It was too complicated. All right, the next thing is to commit our changes, but you can also do that manually using the graphical user interface by looking at the commit tab here on the left, and you'll see all the pages that we've changed. So remember, we changed init.py, and it shows us where the changes that we made are. There was one change. And listperson.html, we've inserted this HTML into our template. So we want to commit all of those changes and just call it something like my attempt, just like I did last time. Yes, that was my attempt at task 1. This is my attempt at task 2. Now that we've done that, we can have a look at task 3. Check that one out. So task 3 is now checked out, and you'll notice, I think you'll find that every time we change the code, Flask automatically restarts, which is fantastic. We don't have to do all the restarts, and we can have a look at what the solution is that they've done. So there's the people in the database, and in the solution, which I did earlier, I've added another column here called action that's going to do something else. That's going to view, so we could look at individual people within the database and see a bit more about them. We can see what ministries they've held, we can see where they were born and when, and what their full name is. And we've put that on the Prime Minister table as well. So I'll just hide this. It's just not showing the URL very clearly, so I'll make it a bit smaller. So when I hover over here, you can see in the bottom left hand corner it's saying what the URL is, which is 127.0.0.1:5000. So that's the IP address and port number that we're running our web application out of, and /person is our URL, and /1 identifies which person it is. If we go to the next one, is /3 is Anthony Albanese, /8 is Edmund Barton. Okay, back to here. Challenge 3, show a list of recreations in viewperson.html. So we've got a few hints here. Table recreation is a foreign key ID person. Let's just check that. We can have a look at the schema. So there's our schema where we've created all the tables. So there's recreation. I've got a primary key called ID that auto increments if we add more records to it. It's linked by ID person to the person table, and we've got a varchar there which is 255 characters at most, that contains the text of what recreations this person likes to take part in. Okay. That's right. Add SQL in Prime Minister view person to find the list of recreations, and pass the list of recreations to render template. Okay, and that's for view person. So here's view persons, here's view person. So we have a look at the code here. This is our URL. Remember, it was /person and then / and then a number, which is the ID, so we know which person we want to look at. And by using that, this is a way of Flask specifying what the URL is. It then translates anything that's in that position to be the ID when it calls this function. If the person doesn't exist, it returns a 404, which you might be familiar with in the web, means web page not found. So it selects from table person where the ID is equal to the ID that you've specified, and you could just type that URL straight in. You don't have to click it on a hyperlink. The asterisk here means select every field, so it's just saying everything we know about that person that's in the table person table, select it and store it into a variable called person. Then person, if it's got fields for date of death or date of birth, then we can calculate the age of the person. So we can do this calculation. I've put a function up earlier which calculates the age of a person. So we can do that, but the person object that we created up here is going to be of type sqlite3.row, and that does not support item assignment, which means we can't set the age of death into that row object. So what we'll do is we'll convert it to a dictionary. So this is a Python technique that you should know, is how to convert from one type to another. Is you just call a function that is of the name of the class that you want. So dict and parentheses will convert anything that it can into a dictionary, and it knows how to convert sqlite3.row into a dictionary, so it'll do that. So person's now a dictionary, and then it'll behave exactly the same pretty much, except that now we can assign extra fields to it. We can assign an age of death to that, and once we've assigned that, when we pass it through to our template, the template can then display the age that the person died. Now we've got some extra SQL here, which is looking at the ministry to find out when the person worked in a ministry, like the Prime Ministry or the Deputy Prime Ministry. And it needs to find two of them, so it can find the start date and end date. So that's we're going to store into ministries. And now let's do a similar thing for recreation. So we say we want to select VC recreation from table recreation where ID person equals question mark, and that's going to be our how we're going to bind it. And let's sort it alphabetically. Ascending. All right. Okay, now we have to pass in the ID person again. And you see, what we need to pass through here is a tuple. Now it's only going to be a one item tuple, And in Python, if you just put a value and surrounded it in parentheses, it's going to think you're using the parentheses for grouping, like an arithmetic operator. And so it's just going to group them as a single thing and just return ID person. To say it's a tuple, we have to put a comma in there. But there's only one item, so we don't put anything after the comma, and then it knows that it's actually a tuple. All right, so let's fetch all of those and pass them off to got the wrong. There we go. Recreations equals recreations, and it's going to render in view person.html. So let's have a look in view person.html and see what we need to add. There we've got the ministries. Now we'll put after that, we'll put the recreations. So we'll do similar to what we've done here. We'll do a check first to see if there are any. So we use the Ginger templating code for that, and that'll look at the list, and if the list is non-existent or has only got 0 entries, then that'll return false. And that's going to end with a end if. So anything in between the if and the end if gets executed if there are any recreations that exist. So we'll put them between a level 3 header. This is HTML if you're not familiar with it. And then we'll do a loop. We don't need to do a table because there's only one column. So let's do a for loop. Now remember, each recreation is going to be a record out of the database. So it's going to be type SQLite 3. And we want to do we're going to convert it to into text. And by using this way of referring to the Ginger, it will actually sanitize the text so that we don't actually import any bad HTML into here. It'll escape it all. So we're going to get the recreation is the record, and then inside that it's got a field which we'll call VC recreation, is what the name of the field is in the database. So a div will give us a new line for each one, and then we can end the for loop. Okay. So why don't we just jump in and see if we got any errors doing this. So let's have a look at Anthony Albanese recreations. Nothing came up. Maybe we don't have any information on him. Let's look at Tony Abbott's recreation, cycling and surf lifesaving. And they're not in a table this time, they're just in divs. So that worked. Any questions? How are you going? Am I going too fast for you? Feel free to just pause the video and try to work through these things yourself. It's really really useful to work through these things yourself. But if you have paused the video and you're just coming in and you're late and you want to ask a question about something that you did before, that's fine as well. Okay, add the SQL, we did that. Pass the list, modify the view. Okay, so we've done all that. There we go. I even gave you the code to call the SQL because we're not really concentrating on the SQL database part of this tonight. We're mainly concentrating on how to create a web application. Okay, let's save our changes and have a look at the built-in answers. Actually, I should change the branch first. Got to keep remembering to do that. And the main reason I'm doing that here is so that I can go back to task 3 and it won't have any of my changes in it because I've saved them in a different branch. But if you really wanted to, if you're going to throw this whole repository out once you're finished with it, then you can even commit them into task 3 branch. Okay, my attempt, that looks good. We'll check out task 4, which is still up on the server. So let's check that one out. How are you going? Keeping up? There's a lot going on here. You know, some people might know it, which is why I'm going quickly, but if you don't know it, I can go through any part of it in much more detail. Because the point of tonight is to learn all these techniques. Challenge 4. Add a hyperlink to the nav bar called Deputy Prime Ministers and create a function called View Ministers that takes the name of a ministry and that is called by View Prime Ministers and View Deputy Prime Ministers. Okay, so we're going to try to reuse our code here. We've currently got a code that can view the Prime Ministers, but can we just modify it slightly and use it to call Deputy Prime Ministers as well? Okay. So there's View Prime Ministers. So we'll tab in, define our function, and it's going to be called View Ministers. And we're going to press a colon at the end of the line. And I'll just put in the word pass for now. Alright, now it's looking for it's going to be called by View Prime Ministers and it's going to be called by View Deputy Prime Ministers, and each one of those are going to pass through a ministry and a page title if we want. But we've defaulted the page title to none. Okay, so we can say if page title is none, then we want the page title to be the ministry name plus an S on the end. So let's call it, well, just that line. In fact, that's exactly the line we want. Okay, and the rest of the code we can use. And pass that off to list minister. Well, that's good. So now for View Prime Ministers, we don't have to call all this code again. We can just pass through the what the ministry is. And I've got it here as the default is a variable all in caps, which is what you'd normally do for a constant. So let's, at the top of the page, we'll create a constant. And this is useful to make sure that we always spell it exactly the same way. It'll do some code checking to make sure that the constant exists. And we'll have another one for Deputy Prime Minister. You know, just little things like the capitalization will always be the same as well. So we define them there, and now we can use them down here. Return View Ministers, and they've both got defaults, so we don't actually even need to provide anything because the defaults work for Prime Ministers. And then we'll create another one for Deputy Prime Ministers. in which case we want the ministry to equal Deputy Prime Minister. And we need a different URL for that, so we'll call it Deputy Prime Ministers as our URL. Okay, let's check the task. Add a hyperlink to the navbar. Yes, we better do that. So go to project. I'll look at layout is where our navbar is kept, and what the layout has is all the HTML that's on every page. So rather than typing it in on every page, we use it like a template for the other templates. So all the other templates extend this template. So they'll include everything that's here, and then they'll just add a little bit. And they add a bit by creating a block called page content. And so the block will be called page content on the other template that we have, and that'll replace whatever block's called page content here. Okay. So we're adding a new, so we've got this unordered list, and these are all the list items. This is a common way of doing navigation bars, and we're using Bootstrap. You can see we're importing the Bootstrap features so that we can an unordered list in HTML of hyperlinks will show up like a nice nav bar, especially if we put it in a nav tag there. All right, we'll use URL4, and what that does is it looks for a function called view deputy prime ministers, and then it will work out what URL is required to call that function, and that means if we happen to change the URL requirement later on, this URL4 will call the new URL requirement. Okay, deputy prime ministers. So that all looks good. I can delete that to-do item. And we'll save that, and let's have a look at our running application. So I press Prime Ministers, and now because I've refreshed the page, we've got our navbar also includes Deputy Prime Ministers. So I'll click that, and you can see, yep, John Anderson was a Deputy Prime Minister. Anthony Albanese was even a Deputy Prime Minister back quite a few years ago. All right, any questions on that? So what have we done there? We've added a hyperlink. We've seen how the URL4 command works to call a function. We've seen how to remove duplicate code by putting all the code in one function that gets called by two different functions. Yep, that's worked. All right, so let's save all this. So we know the procedure. New branch. Commit those two files that we changed. We could double click on them to see what changes we've made, but we just checked it worked and it was working, so that's good. So they've been committed in. You can see they've been added into the list of changes here in the log, and there's no more changes to be committed. Now we'll check out task 5. And let's have a look at what task 5 is. Okay, so demo, first of all, we're going to add a form to listperson.html. So user can search on a person's name. Okay, so we've checked out task 5, so that should be in our code already. Let's have a look. So we're looking at list person.html. And here's a form at the top. And I've actually changed this. You may not. You see it's come up in red for given names for me, and that's because there was a bug in the code that I've provided where I had the wrong ID. So the ID should be given name, but I've called it given names here. And Pycharm has very conveniently highlighted in red the fact that the ID is wrong there. So I'll fix that by changing it to given name, and now it's back to green. So when you have in HTML where you have a label and you say for, then this has to be a valid ID for a particular input. So in this case the input, which is just for text, is this one here, and so that's the label for this one. So given name is the label for this, and that's just handy it's handy if you've got checkboxes. You can click on the label and it knows which checkbox to tick. It also helps focus the mouse. I think if you click on it, it'll select the text input into that, even if you just click on the label itself. Alright, so when you create an input, you can give it an ID, which is what you refer to it here by the for. You can also give it a name, and in this case I've given them both the same. The ID and the name are the same. Now IDs have to be unique in your whole HTML on a page. The names can have duplicates, especially on checkboxes, because you can have several checkboxes for a thing that's that all have the same name. And then the information in this form will be sent back to the web application, identifying each piece of data by the name of the input field. So we've got an input field for surname and an input field for given name that we're going to search on. And that form can get posted back to the web application. It can be sent to it either as a post. So we've said use post method. You can also use get method here, but we'll use post because it actually makes it a bit easier for us. Get method is where everything gets put into the URL as query parameters. Post means it gets an additional payload, goes with the request to the web server. Now on the web server, this is where we receive the information coming in, and we'll be looking at view persons. So we can say here now that the methods that we're likely to get in for this route, which is /persons, we can either get a get or a post request coming in. So we'll get a get the first time someone clicks on the link, because a hyperlink will just produce a get request. But if someone submits a form, we'll get a post request. And so by using these two different methods, we can determine how the person's come to this page, how they come to our function. Have they just clicked on the hyperlink that says persons, or have they clicked on the submit button to the form to say search? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the two ways that they could have come in. So if the request method is post, that means they've searched, and if the request method is get, then we'll just do nothing. We'll just give them an empty page, and that way it'll be just waiting for them to type in something into the search parameters. So we're going to we're going to look for the given name, and we're going to look for the surname. So if they type in a given name, then we're going to use wildcards to say they can just type in any part of the given name. So we'll have a wildcard before and after, and the wildcard for SQLite is the %sign. And if they don't type in anything, then we'll just say it doesn't matter what the given name is. We'll just return all of them, and we'll just use a wildcard totally for that. And we need to do that for given name and surname. So I've just created a little sub function here, which just says convert this search string into a SQL search string. And so I'm going to strip off any white space before and after it, then I'm going to put a percent sign before and after it, and then we're going to use that as our parameter in our SQL that we're going to use. Now for the SQL, we've got some SQL here, and this time rather than using question marks, we're going to use named bindings. So a named binding looks like this. It's going to have a colon and then the name of the binding. So we've got a colon GN and we've got another one colon SN. Now we're going to be looking in the common name or the given names for what they type in for given name, because sometimes, like if you wanted to search for Tony Abbott, if you typed in Tony, his given name is Anthony, but his common name is Tony. So by searching in both, it will make sure that we get it regardless of where the name is that we're searching on, whether we're searching on Anthony or Tony. Alright, and then when we run pmdb execute, rather than provide a tuple with our ordered bindings, this time we can provide a dictionary with named bindings, and they'll get bound in at the particular places in the SQL. And then we just fetch all the records. And once we get that, then we can return, that'll populate the persons list. This one, if we have come in through the get method, then persons will be nothing. And when we return list person, it'll just have nothing here for persons, and it'll say people in database. So let's see how that works. I'll go to people. There it is. So remember last time we clicked on people, we got a list of every person in the database. Now there's no one there because we've come in through get. But if we click on search, that'll do a post. So let's type in something. Let's try Tony, and we get Tony Abbott. Let's do a search on Anthony, and we get Anthony Albanese and Tony Abbott. Okay, so it looks like we haven't got a common name of Tony for Anthony Albanese, and that's probably true. I haven't heard anyone call him Tony Albanese. Alright, if we do search and there's nothing in the search, it just uses wildcard for both of them, for the given name and the surname, and we get all the results back just like we were before. Right. So that was our demo. Challenge 5. So the table already exists in the database. Follow the instructions in the tutorial here to add authentication to our application. Alright, so this is going to take a while. So let's get started, and I'll just go up until 6:30, and if we don't get it finished, then we'll finish it next time. Alright. So at the Flask website, they've got this quite a good tutorial. I'd recommend going through it. So, going through this tutorial as well as watching these videos should give you a good understanding about how Flask apps all go together. The first thing we're going to do is create a blueprint and views. And the reason you want to create blueprints is because it's a good way of organizing your code. If you look at our code at the moment, we've just been putting everything into our init.py, and for a web application of any size, this is just going to be an enormous file with every single URL that's any user is going to want to do, and every function that needs to be called is going to come in through this one Python module. It's not really a good way of organizing your code, so let's have a look at blueprints as a better way. Alright, so to create a blueprint, we need to create folders and for our templates, and we need to create, so it's going to have our URLs are going to get prefixed with /auth, so we're doing an auth blueprint here, so for authentication. And we're going to create a module called auth.py, and that's going to be in our our main package. So here their main package is called Flasker. Our main package is called Prime Minister. So we'll create a file here, Python file called auth. So let's click on the package and say I want to create a new Python file in this package, and it's going to be called auth. And because it's a Python file, it'll automatically put .py on the end, or you can type it in, it'll work it out. Do we want to add it to Git? Yep, so we can save it when we save our changes. And the code that's going to be in it is this code here. So I'll just copy and paste that in. And the only thing that's changed, their package name is Flasker, our package name is Prime Minister. So we'll fix that. That's was underlined in red, so that was helpfully pointed out to us. Everything else is good. You can see most of these functions are in grey, and that's because we haven't started using them yet. But we've created the blueprint, so that's the important thing. This creates a blueprint named auth. Now we want to register the blueprint in our init.py, so that when the app gets created, it can know about it. So we only just need those two lines, and see it's in the create app function. So all those functions we've been putting in, we've been defining them within create app and then returning the app. So here's create app, and then right down the bottom you see all the functions we've been creating, and then right down the bottom we'll stick in this register the blueprint auth.bp, and then we return the app. And that's why all of these functions were indented for spaces. You may have noticed they've all been indented for spaces, and that's just because they're actually child functions of the overall function. Okay, we're going to create a first view. It's going to be register. So users can register to log in. And so we have a new function here. So rather, this is for a new root /register, which will be actually /auth/register. And because it's in the blueprint, we don't have to put it in init.py anymore. We can put it straight into auth.py. And so it's in part of our blueprint. And so rather than app.root, we're calling it bp.root. Yeah. Let's have a look at it. So it's going to look at a form for a username and a password, and the username is required, password is required. Okay, now they've got a database, also an SQLite database, but their field names are and table names are slightly different. Ours is table user and VC username and VC password. All right, but we can keep the variable names the same as they've got, username and password. db.commit. That all looks good. Oh, yeah. So remember, we've just done in our sample code, on our search form, we managed to work out what the posted given name and surname were by looking at the request.form, and so we're doing the same thing here. So there'll be a same sort of thing, a form taking two values, a username and a password, and they'll be stored in the request.form value that gets passed through to us, that's available to us when we run our functions in Flask. All right. So what this app is going to do, someone's going to come along and they can register the first time, and once they've registered, they'll have set their username and password, and then they'll be able to log in. So we want to do a login route at the same place. Once again, we check for these names. Table user. So that's looking for the username, and if it's wrong, we'll get an incorrect username. And everything else looks okay. So what we're going to do is store the user ID of this user into the session, and then return to the index page. There's also, if there are any sort of errors, we use this flash error technique, and that's a thing that Flask gives us. We're already in our layout. We've got a spot for showing all the flash messages, and we've done that in layout.html. If you want to see that is where that is. And now another thing we're going to do is load the logged in user every time there's a request. And we're going to store it in this global variable G. So this gets done every time there's a request made of our application. And the way it knows to do that is because we've annotated it with this command here, bp before app request. You can also do it with app.before app request if you were doing it in init.py. But the annotation in a blueprint is bp.before app request, and that means that every time there's a request to our application, we'll check if the session has got the user ID, and the session will get that user ID from a cookie. And Flask handles all that for us, so we don't have to worry about the intricacies of analyzing cookies. But once we've got the user ID, then we can set the user in our global variable G, and then everything in our code can refer to G to get the user, because that knows that this has happened before the request was made, before the request was processed. Where ID equals user ID. That's all good. Okay, so how much more have we got? Just 2 more, so we should fit these 2 in, and then that'll be it for the night. So we've got a log out, which is basically clearing our session. And returning to a new page, which is the index page. And we can also create this thing login required. So we're going to create our own annotation that we can use on any functions that we feel that are only useful for people who've logged in. So this is what is using func tools. And it does all this wrapping. This is a bit complicated, but anyway, it works. So you really don't have to worry about the mechanism at this stage, how it works, but it just means that now we can use an @login required on any page that we want them to be logged into, and if they aren't logged in, this will automatically redirect them to the login page, and there they can log in before they get to the page that they were trying to get to. Okay, well, that'll be all for tonight. Next month we'll continue on with adding authentication to this. I'd really recommend going through that whole tutorial on the Flask with their information, and then you'll understand my stuff a lot better as well. Next week Arun will be giving some more machine learning, another machine learning session, so that'll be fun. I'll be joining as a student next week. So I hope to see you again. Thank you for your attendance.